I want you to think for a second whether or not you believe that sounds can be sacred. And by that I mean you might hear music that you find compelling and sometimes highly moving, and it feels like it's communicating something deeper. The Vedas are the oldest prayers in the world. They are the oldest oral traditions in the world. And if you go to India today, I can tell you because I've been there several times, and every single time I go to India, I am struck by the way that the Vedas find their way into daily life. And it's interesting because most people don't sing the Vedas. These are sung by, as you can see in this picture, by Brahmins who are priests. And they sit around the sacrificial fires and they give sacrifice of flowers and fruits and vegetables into the sacrificial flames, the same fires that have been burning in India for 3,000 years. And these were the ancient fires of the sages, the old wisdom figures who, according to tradition, originally received this knowledge and in the form of sounds. So what you're listening to here are mantras, and mantras are holy sounds. They're also prayers. So if you want to know what a mantra sounds like a little bit more in a religious context, this is more of a popularized mantra. You might hear this on the radio in a taxi or something like that. But the actual sound of mantras sounds more like this when sung by priests. Let me get this for you.
त्रिपुरान्तकाय त्र्यम्बकाय त्रिपुरान्तकाय त्रिकालाग्निकालाय त्रिकालाग्निकालाय कालाग्निरुद्राय कालाग्निरुद्राय नीलकण्ठाय नीलकण्ठाय मृत्युञ्जयाय मृत्युञ्जयाय.
So as you listen to this, you'll notice that the actual mantra itself is repetitive. It says the same thing over and over again. And these are songs or collections of texts and verses originally to the gods. And according to ancient Vedic wisdom, the one truth the sages use or call by many names. And this idea that this many forms of prayer calls forth the truth of the gods. And this, before even you get to the traditional Hindu gods, you get to this form of prayer and worship, which is really interesting. So the Vedas are a sacred knowledge and power that was brought by the Aryans. The Aryans were the people that came to India. And these prayers were probably first written down before 2000 BCE. This is the late Bronze Age. This is a very long time ago. And you'll notice that the Vedic texts are broken into 4 sections. The Rig Veda, the hymns to the gods, which we just heard one of. That was from the Rig Veda. The Yajur Veda, which is the knowledge of the rites, which was most important for the priest class. The Sama Veda, also important for the priests. And then the Atharva Veda, which were the rituals used at home. And while those Vedas are no longer chanted, they do speak to rituals that are still used in India. So that's interesting. It sort of sets the foundation for all the things that happen later. So in each of these Vedic books, you have mantras, and what you just heard was a set of mantras. Those are hymns or prayers in musical form. And it's interesting because when you listen to the Vedas, it's hard to get it in your ear as a Westerner, but there was a time a few years back, I was teaching a class, and there were a couple girls that were coming in early. This was an A-block class, and the Vedas were somehow being on. I wasn't playing them, but I had some link that kept on going on kind of by mistake. And day after day, the sort of Vedas would start the class, and it became kind of a joke because it was sort of, what is this and what's going on? And after about 2 weeks of this, the kids were getting tired of it. And then finally, there was a moment where one of them said, I'm starting to get this in my ear and it's really pretty intense and I'm starting to feel something about it. And it was almost as if the music started to take over a little bit. And like a lot of forms of music, sometimes you have to listen to it a lot for it actually to have some kind of impact on you. So the point of this is that these are the foundations of Hindu belief. Now, as you can see here, the foundation of Hinduism comes from the idea of sacrifice. So everything in life feeds on something else. That's the way that Hindus view things, that we're all sort of feeding on other things, whether we're feeding on vegetables or animals. We are devouring things to maintain our own life. Our own life is devoured. We are eaten by fungus and we're broken down, or we're eaten by fire if we're cremated, which is the tradition in India. And so this idea is that there is a sacred fire in every person. It's kind of like the soul. And this sacred fire in your human body is fed by sacrifice. And the same thing, the whole universe is sustained by continued sacrifice. So this is an interesting idea that the Vedas are very deeply connected to the sense of sacrifice and importance of sacrifice in life. The other interesting thing about this is that the early sages were, the belief was that they were eating or drinking soma. And soma also is something the gods drink according to Vedic myth. But soma was very clearly a psychedelic mushroom of some kind. So if you look at Hinduism, it's increasingly convinced that there was an influence of mind expanding plants at the foundation of the religion and at the foundation of some of the early Vedas. This is not approved by scholars, but it's definitely a theory, and it's backed up by the Vedas themselves that speak to this. But the sacrifice is very important. Now, this idea of cosmic sacrifice, if you take the time to read this, this idea that man is the hearth, and here they mean man, people, right? The human being is the hearth. The speech, just excuse the gendered language. In this fire, the gods offer the food grains, the semen is born, right? So there you go. There's the connection of creation and sacrifice. This idea of sex as a form of both creation and sacrifice. So this whole idea of a little bit like ashes to ashes in the Bible, this idea that you are carried to the fire at the end of your life and the sparks give birth to new life. So this gets into the whole concept of reincarnation or recreation in some way. So this cosmic sacrifice comes from the Vedas, from the philosophical part of the Vedas, or the Upanishads, which are very important. Now, there are various gods connected to the Vedas, and Agni, the god of fire, we've already mentioned. He's important because there's this way in which fire delivers the sacrifice to the gods. So that's sort of like Hermes in the Greek mythology. There's the god that's sort of the messenger to the gods. And what's interesting here is you've got Indra, who's the ruler of heaven, and he's depicted as a warrior and also almost androgynous in his form, so that there's sort of a gender neutral element to this. It's interesting that in India, the idea of gender is sort of broken down frequently in the various murtis, and you see this here. This androgynous figure, neti, neither this nor that. Varuna, the god of the universe, a little bit like Brahma later on, becomes the creator god. Also, the god of, because he's the creator god, there's a sexual element to Varuna, as there is in Indra. These are interesting gods because they are they're clearly sexual beings. They engage in relationships, and they are human in that sense. Now, Rudra, the god of death and destruction, the sky god, and a lot of people see this as sort of almost a little bit like Thor or Zeus, the high god, the god of the sky. You can see him holding that trident, and you'll see later when you get to depictions of Shiva, Rudra is sort of the pre-Shiva figure. So a lot of the gods you see later in Hinduism are sort of based on these principles. So Indra and Varuna become sort of morphed into what will later be Brahma, and Rudra becomes Shiva, and Agni also becomes sort of a form of Shiva as well, which I think is really interesting. So part of the Vedas speak to the way that you celebrate, and so you have these yantras, the geometrical figures that get done as a form of sacrifice. These are usually done in the form of flower petals or sand. They're done in public for major celebrations and worship ceremonies. And you can see all the flowers around the edge. This is a sacrifice. This is being done for the gods, also coming out of the Vedic tradition. And where all of this comes back to the daily rituals is that in every Hindu home, you will see this sort of what's called a puja table. And a puja table is where you have your own depictions of the gods that you are connected to. So as you can see in the lower right, that's a puja to Ganesh, the elephant god. In the upper left, you can see two women with a bunch of sacrificial flowers and fruits. Those are all being given to the gods as a form of sacrifice. You'll see this in the temples all over the place, but usually when those were originally done, that's where the Vedas came in. That's where the music was. That's where it sort of spoke to this transformational process of music and sound as a form of prayer. And if you look at the puja on the upper right, you can even see Jesus on the upper, I think on the left-hand side. So again, we're talking about the inclusiveness of Hinduism. There's a great example of it. So if we go back to the Vedas and the sound of the Vedas, here.
Sarvani rupani vijitya dhiraha namani krutva bhivadan yadaste thana purastadya mudajahara chakra pravidvan pradishaschatasraha.
So if you listen carefully to that, you'll notice that there is underneath it that drone of the tambura, which is a drone instrument, which is playing the Om sound underneath it. So underneath all of it, you have this universal mantra with the songs of frequently the Rig Veda, which is the part of the Veda which speaks to the gods and the hymns that are directed towards them. So even though the Vedas don't have such importance in modern Hinduism, most Hindus don't know the words, they don't speak Sanskrit, they don't understand it. It's still a very deep part of the tradition. It's the root of the tradition, and it's interesting. It's a little bit like some of the early Latin chants in the Catholic Church that most Catholics wouldn't listen to, but it's deeply important to the structure and purpose of the religion. So what I would ask you to think about is, what purpose does music play in a religion, and how does this kind of hypnotic chanting still going on today as we speak somewhere in India by the side of a river in a sacrificial fire? You'll have groups of Brahmin priests chanting away. And what's the significance of this long-standing tradition of chanting and singing and worshiping the gods in this way? And I don't know, maybe it doesn't speak to you, but if it does, you might think about why. And you might think about whether or not something has power simply because it has such a long legacy, that just the fact that millions and millions of people have listened to and sung these prayers makes it important in itself. So I'd ask you to think about those things, perhaps write a little bit about it, and we'll hopefully have a chance to talk more about it in class.